Class is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you could join us today. We're going to get started with today's webinar. We hope you're comfortable with a nice cup of tea or a refreshing beverage, and we're looking forward to chatting with you for the next hour. First, we'll just tell you some quick logistics to make sure everyone's oriented. As audience members, we welcome you. You're going to be on mute so that we can reduce our noise echo, but we do want to welcome questions at any time. If there's something you'd like to ask our panelists, please feel free to submit that to our question box at any time, and we'll get to them during our Q&A or throughout the presentation if we have time. We want to make sure that you have all the material from today's webinar, so we will be sharing the slides as well as the recording with all participants. And as well, we have a few handouts as part of today's session, and you can find those in the GoToWebinar menu panel at the right side of your screen. Finally, if you are on social media, please tweet with us. We are at ProsperCan, and we use hashtag ProsperWebinar for all webinars. We would also like to begin by acknowledging that we are joining you from Toronto, which is situated upon traditional territories. The territories include the Wendat, Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations, and the Métis Nation. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabeg, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have this opportunity to work in the community on this territory. We also want to acknowledge and thank everyone on the line joining us from traditional territories across Turtle Island. We are honored to be having this discussion with you, and we thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. My name is Glenna Harris, and I am Manager of Learning and Training here at Prosper Canada. Prosper Canada's Programming in Financial Literacy works with partners in all sectors to ensure that Canadians have access to financial education, products and services, and advice that they need to build their financial well-being. We certainly see debt management as part of these solutions, and we look forward to our speakers telling us all about that today. Our Programming in Financial Literacy is part of the work of the Canadian Centre for Financial Literacy, which is co-founded and supported by TD Bank Group. So we'd like to welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us. And we'd like to welcome our speakers, which we'll introduce properly in just one moment. Today's webinar is all about debt in Canada and solutions for when the debt becomes really significant. We know that debt is an increasing concern here in Canada, and we look forward to hearing more about the specialized solutions that are offered by organizations such as the Credit Counselling Society, from where Arbour is joining us, as well as the types of solutions provided by licensed insolvency trustees, which Gillian Goldblatt, she's a licensed insolvency trustee from MSI Spergel. And then finally, we will be concluding with a Q&A. So please have your questions ready. If you think of one at any time, please share it with us in the question box. So we at Prosper Canada work with many partners in the community, and there are a number of different credit counseling services across Canada, and we want to recognize that great work. Anne Arbour joins us from the Credit Counselling Society. She is a financial educator for the Greater Toronto Area. Anne has over 25 years of combined experience in facilitation and financial services. She holds an MBA and is a certified educator in personal finance. She's been interviewed by print, television, and digital media on topics related to personal finance. She's sat on several expert panels and advisory groups, and she currently serves on 2 financial literacy networks serving youth and women, respectively. Welcome, Anne. We're so glad to have you with us today.
Thank you. Very glad to be here.
And Gillian Goldblatt is a compassionate licensed insolvency trustee who helps individuals, sole proprietors, and incorporated businesses who are dealing with insurmountable financial obligations. With a strong background as a CPA and a CA, Gillian works to identify the most practical and affordable solutions to debt problems. She also sits on the Ontario Association of Insolvency and Restructuring Practitioners Board, and she promotes financial literacy as a volunteer with CPA Canada's Community Connect network. Welcome, Gillian. We're glad to have you with us today.
Thanks very much for having me, Glenna.
And as I've already said, I'm Glenna. I'm the Manager of Learning and Training here at Prosper Canada, responsible for financial education programming and learning resource development, including great webinars such as this. So we're glad to have you all with us today. But now that we've properly introduced ourselves, we would love to hear more about you listening in from the audience. So we'd love to ask you a couple of questions. Could you tell us a little bit more about your services that you offer? Do you, or in what way do you currently support people living with debt? Perhaps you offer financial education, perhaps you do one-on-one financial coaching, you may offer specialized debt or credit counseling, perhaps you don't offer these services directly, but you do refer clients to specialized solutions, or perhaps you don't offer any of the above, but you're still keen to learn about these topics. So you can click as many of these answers that apply to you, and I'll leave the poll open for another 30 seconds. And if there's a type of debt service that you offer, but we haven't listed it here, please do feel free to type it in to the question box and let us know what other kinds of support you offer. All right, I will close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So it looks like a majority of you, 79%, offer financial education about debt or other money management. And then almost tied for second and third, 61% of you offer financial coaching or counseling, and 65% of you refer clients to specialized debt support. So that's really amazing to hear. And then it sounds like 14% of you are yourselves debt or credit counselors. And then thank you to the 11% of you who are not doing these services, but are still greatly interested in learning today. So thank you for those answers. Next, we'd love to know what you're most keen to learn about today. Our panelists are going to be talking about debt management plans, consumer proposals, and bankruptcy filing. But of course, there's always a wide variety of aspects to any of these topics. So we'd love to hear more about what you're most keen to know about today. So I'll leave this poll open for another 30 seconds. All right, I'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right. It looks like 2/3 of you are especially keen to know about debt management plans. So Anne, that's really great endorsement for you. We hope you're ready for this captive audience. And then Gillian, close on the heels. Number 2, consumer proposals. About a fifth of our listeners are really keen to know about that. So thank you for telling us that. We hope this presentation will be very informative for you. And then last but not least, our panelists are particularly keen to know where you are listening from, since their services are distributed across the country. And I'm going to apologize right away for the fact that I've had to cluster several provinces all together in a few of these answers. Regrettably, our webinar application only allows us to offer 5 choices. So I've had to do some clustering with British Columbia and 2 of our territories, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba all together, and then Ontario, Quebec, and then our East Coast provinces. I realize now I've unfortunately left Yukon off of our list, but if you are from the Yukon territory, please include yourself in the option for British Columbia, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. So I'll leave this poll open for another 15 seconds or so. All right, I'll close this in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So it looks like about half of you are joining us from Ontario. Welcome. Another third are from Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Following quickly on that, 17% of you are from British Columbia or the North. And then our East Coast provinces, about 3% from there and 1% from Quebec. So welcome. We appreciate learning more about you, and we hope that you'll enjoy today's presentation. Anne and Gillian, it looks like we've got quite a lot of Ontario representation, but just as much from the West. So thank you for telling us more about yourself. I'm going to introduce our first speaker in just a moment, but before that, we want to make sure that we have some common conversation to start with. We know that debt in Canada is an issue that continues to be significant. In the last few years, our household debt to income ratio has continued to rise, and the number now is actually at 178.5%. Even just a few years ago, it was only in the 160s, and that was already quite high. So we know that debt is becoming an increasing concern. This is especially true in large cities where the cost of living is getting higher and higher. And even beyond just the sheer numbers, we know that finances and debt are a very significant cause of stress in Canadians' lives. So then reducing debt is a big important need for many of us. If we can reduce debt, that will lead to reduced stress. It'll improve our financial well-being. We know that the less we borrow, the less likely we are to incur future stress and future debt. So if we can reduce the need to borrow, then our financial well-being will also increase. But also we know that these solutions to get out of debt can be even harder to access for Canadians on low incomes because accessing mainstream services is often harder for this population, since they may feel unwelcome in these institutions, they may have less knowledge of where to go, or these services may not be as easily accessible in all communities. So we know that getting our debt under control is very important for us. And often this kind of solution can come from personal money management, when we can get our expenses under control and maybe add a little more income into the household. This can really help, but when the debt is significant, that means that there's some more significant solutions needed. So this is when people such as our speakers come in. You can meet with a credit counselor to make a debt management plan, or meet with a licensed insolvency trustee to see if a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy filing would actually be a better fit for your scenario. Broadly speaking, if you're looking for a credit counselor in your community, the link on the screen there for Credit Counselling Canada is a great place to start. Credit Counselling Canada includes several different agencies, including Credit Counselling Society, which Anne will be speaking from, but they also include services through Credit Canada, Money Mentors, and others. And Gillian will be speaking to you as a licensed insolvency trustee, but there are many ways to find one of those as well in your community. So we recommend this link from the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy as a great place to start to learn more about these services. So I think that's quite enough from me so far today. So I'm going to turn things over to Anne, who's going to tell us all about the type of work they do at the Credit Counselling Society and what's involved with a debt management plan. So Anne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Glenna, and thank you to everybody for joining today, and welcome. And yeah, that's a nice number to see who's interested in debt management programs. So we'll speak a bit about that. As Glenna has mentioned, I'm the financial educator in the GTA for the Credit Counselling Society, but just to give you some shape around who we are and what we do, we're a registered nonprofit service for consumers. We provide free credit and budget and debt counseling for Canadians across 5 provinces and 2 territories, including the Yukon, if you happen to be on the line. And we also have a relationship with an organization that does handle the East Coast as well, so we like to think we're as national as possible. We began service in 1996, and since that time, last year we took almost 74,000 calls. In total, in terms of the debt management program, we've helped many, many Canadians, and we've served over 500,000, almost about 600,000 Canadians across Canada, learn how to solve their debt problems, how to manage their money better, how to get in control of credit. Because as Glenna said, you know, this financial stress causes stress in every other part of life, physically, emotionally, all those kinds of things. If we can move to the next slide, please. You'll see we serve, we have counselling offices from BC through Ontario, soon to adding another one in Ontario as well. But we've also got a client care team that's on the phone 6 days a week, supporting 15 languages to answer as many questions as we possibly can right then and there, and then if need be, setting up an appointment with a counselor, and we'll talk about what is involved in that going forward. And the next slide, please, is a bit of my brag slide to give you some idea of who we are as an organization, but also what you want to look for in any kind of credit counseling service that you might be accessing through Credit Counselling Canada. You want to make sure that organizations are accredited. So, you know, your best friend might want to cut your bangs, but we all know that's not necessarily the best idea. I speak from personal experience many years ago. You know, I've been in financial services for a long, long time, but I'm not a certified financial planner. So I would never recommend something for your own personal RSP or TFSA based on my advice. You want to make sure you're going to someone who's certified. The same goes for a credit counseling agency. You want to make sure that they're a member of and a member in good standing of an accrediting body like Credit Counselling Canada. We happen to be the only the only international affiliate of a larger group out of the States called the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, and their certification is North American, and that's COA. So we happen to have that as well. But all our counselors are accredited as well. So they've all written exams that have a functional element, but also a counseling element and ethical element, those kinds of things. So anyone who is a counselor with us has that designation or is working towards it. You have to be part of the industry. And of course, our greatest pride comes from the reviews from our clients. So Consumer Choice Awards, our employee awards, the best workplaces in Canada, and industry. So EIFEL, we've been recognized both for the quality of our education offerings, but also as an organization itself. So those are the kinds of things you want to look for when you start to refer your clients off. And the next slide, please. So financial stress. You know, why are people calling us? I mentioned last year we took almost 74,000 calls, and it's been growing each year. And as Glenna mentioned, the debt levels right now for the average Canadian, and I'm using air quotes quite wildly in the background here, is $1.78 for every dollar earned. And that is up almost 15 cents from about 4 years ago. So it's a growing issue. People are calling us because and seeking help, and you'll probably recognize a lot of these reasons, but certainly the excessive use of credit to make up the difference, to bridge the difference between, you know, monthly expenses and the next check. Underemployment is becoming, a growing issue, as well as unemployment. But for people who are theoretically employed, not earning enough, not working enough hours, not working a full time. So they might have a bit of income, but not enough to cover the expenses. And the other reason is really life. You know, people get sick, or a family member gets sick, and people are not working. Families break down, certainly in many of the cities, the high cost of housing. But number 3 is pretty typical. I don't know about any of you, but I was not born with money skills. I was fortunate enough to grow up in an environment where money was talked about, money was discussed, and I learned good habits and I learned good skills around it, but that's not the case for a lot of people, and it's certainly not discussed or taught in most of the school systems. So it's really not a surprise that a lot of people don't have the wherewithal, the skill, those kinds of things. The next slide, please. You know, in terms of what to expect when you see us, I've 2 of the handouts that are available are from me. One summarizes our services, and one is a bit of a flow chart in terms of what to expect when you call a credit counseling agency. What, at least our flow chart, you know, you're speaking with a client care person who will then flow you through the process. So they can probably answer some questions or give you some referrals right then and there, or they might set up an appointment with a counselor. And seeing a counselor can be over the phone, or it can be face-to-face. We are probably 50-50 at this point for our counseling appointments. In 2018, it was about almost 21,000 appointments. And those, as I say, can be done over the phone or face-to-face, just given geography, comfort level, timing, those kinds of things. We do have an online chat available, but that's really for general information. And the counselors will sit down in a very compassionate and non-judgmental way to look at somebody's situation. So when any of your clients is facing significant debt or significant financial stress, they can come in, answer a few questions. This doesn't mean you need to bring in, you know, boxes of tax records and things like that, but it's answering simple day-to-day questions about what bills are outstanding. We can help people understand what a credit report looks like, how to get one, translate some of it for them, that kind of thing, and really get the lay of the land and discuss what options will be. And one of those options, the next slide please, Glenna, is the debt management program. So in the spectrum of dealing with debt, certainly there's the do-it-yourself situation, but presumably you're dealing with people who, you know, your clients have tried that route and it's not working. And Gillian will discuss the options that are more towards the other end, the consumer proposal and bankruptcy. The debt management program lives in the middle. It's a voluntary repayment agreement between consumers and their creditors, with a credit counseling agency stepping in to help work that, to help represent and be an agent, if you will, for the client with the creditors. So it's not a loan. We don't lend any money. It's a consolidation in name only. We're a licensed debt pooler, if you've heard that information, that language before, but it's really an agreement that gets facilitated by the Credit Counseling Society with the creditor on behalf of the client. And that's an agreement to repay 100% of the debts, the principal of those debts, over a reasonable period of time, so in under 5 years, as income allows it, in an environment where interest rates have been reduced and in most cases eliminated. So just by example, on a $5,000 credit card bill, if a client has been paying the minimum payments, you know, of $100 a month on an average credit card interest rate, let's say of almost 20%, it would take that individual 65 years to pay that back by just paying the minimum payments. If
Oh
we
my
take the
goodness.
interest, yeah. I should have asked if everyone's sitting down.
Yeah.
And it's over $22,000 in interest. If we can take the interest out, it's 50 months. It's, 4 years and 2 months. So it becomes a really significant weight that gets lifted off the clients. So, you saw our motto before, which is to help, to educate, and to give hope. We take that giving hope part quite seriously. And, they can see the light at the end of the tunnel that much sooner. And with that, we're also teaching essential budgeting skills. We've got a full curriculum that we deliver by live webinar. We also deliver it through the public, through the libraries. I've got a library session tonight. All over, we've got educators in all of the major cities. So I joked before, in almost 23 years, we have a less than 1% repeat rate. So getting into debt is nobody does it because it's a really fun time. We love our clients dearly. We don't want to see them again. We want everyone to succeed and get back on their feet and roll with whatever life has dealt them. And it happens to everybody, to a lot of people, I should say, I'm sorry, but to get back on their feet and move on. So the interesting piece is, and I'm going to make a big assumption that a number of you are working with clients, certainly low income, but also on very low income, so on benefits, so Ontario Works or social assistance, those kinds of programs. That also brings up a whole special set of circumstances. There's a bit of creditor protection when you are in those circumstances, and the credit counselors can help translate and can help navigate that situation and help somebody understand which debts really need to be dealt with at this moment and where they can communicate with creditors and how to communicate with creditors. We've got all kinds of resources to do that, to sort of stop the clock and to say, time out. This is my situation. You're in a bit of a protected zone. So that's where that can come in as well. And the next page is really a case study, just to give you an idea of what we might be looking at. And this is just one case, and there are obviously so many, but we had a client, and names have obviously been changed to protect confidentiality. But a woman, Sandra, in her mid-40s, single mother with 2 kids, she lost her job for a long period of time. So she was making up the difference. She was really living paycheck to paycheck to begin with and didn't have, a nest egg, an emergency fund, anything like that. So she was really relying during that period of unemployment on her credit cards to get her through, to make up the living expenses. She lived in a big city, or lives in a big city, and about 75% of her monthly obligation was just for housing. I always get asked, how much should I be spending on this and this? And it's, all the traditional formulas are out the window these days. Sandra fortunately was eventually able to find some part-time employment, but it's definitely not enough, her income, to cover her monthly obligation with all of that new credit card debt weighing on her. And she was going in further into debt each week. Sandra was able to call us, fortunately, and meet with a counselor to go through the options. And taking a look at it, the counselor knew right away. She helped Sandra really clean up her budget and look at where she was spending and what she was spending on. And she determined that a debt management program was the most appropriate. And she was able to work with, I think it was 3 creditors, with Sandra's 3 creditors, to eliminate the interest. So again, if you imagine that 65-year obligation coming down to 4 years and a little bit, that was the same situation with the other 2 creditors, and able to give Sandra some breathing room to actually come up with a budget. She worked with the counselor. They had a few appointments. They were all free to be able to sit down and figure out how to manage those monthly expenses on her existing income and be able to still pay down that debt and save for future expenses and any future emergencies if they were to happen. So it was, gave her a lot of hope. in terms of being able to manage her new life. And certainly she's continuing to look for full-time work and trying to increase her income as she goes. But at least for the time being and the next few years, she can keep things under control and get out of debt and not be climbing deeper into the hole. Thanks for that. In terms of finding the right advice, as Glenna mentioned, the Credit Counselling Canada link, and I apologize, a lot of us have very similar names, so you have to dig into, read carefully. But just be aware that not all help is in your client's best interest. So please be very careful in terms of the agencies to which you're turning, and try and find a reliable source. And I mentioned, you know, the accreditations and things like that earlier. Not all help is free. And, you know, when someone's in debt or in a bad situation, having to pay fees and charge, you know, for consultations and those kinds of things, it's never made sense for me. When there are not-for-profit agencies that are more than willing and more than happy to meet with somebody and point them in the right direction. So as Gillian will tell you, you know, we're here for our client's best interest, and it's not to, we won't put anyone in a debt management program where it's not the right answer. Giving somebody false hope just to pad our numbers is not the way we work. Taking referral fees is not something we do, those kinds of things. You want to work with an agency that is working in the best interest of the client. And be careful about predatory practices. This could be a whole other webinar, so I won't dwell too long on it, but companies that bill themselves as debt settlement companies or debt brokers, that's a whole different kettle of fish, and you need to be very careful. It's the old adage of, if it sounds too good to be true, it very likely is. Debt can be a complicated process and a highly technical process, and you want to make sure that people are getting the right help. So that's enough about me. I hope if you have any questions, you can post them certainly, and I will follow for them. Oh, is there a fee for the services? The Credit Counselling Society, the meeting with a counselor and speaking on the phone and all those any of those calls or discussions are free. The debt management program itself, there's, depending which province you're in, there's a $50 setup fee or a $75 setup fee. In Ontario, it's $50, just an administration fee to get things set up. And then it's 10% per month of the consolidated amount to a maximum of $75. So to not get too technical, if your consolidated amount, so let's say Sandra's cards, the 3 cards together, her consolidated payment each month was $200. She's paying us $220. $200 to disperse to the creditors and $20 to help keep our lights on. If Glenna's amount was $900, it would max out at $975, so $75 fee. What they don't love me telling, no, they're fine. There is actually some discretion within that as well. So, you know, if Sandra needed an extra few dollars, an extra $10 or something, you know, to buy groceries for her kids, there's some discretion within that fee as well.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Anne. That was
my pleasure.
That was just a great synopsis of the kind of work you do, and really illustrative of how you work on a debt management plan, and how it can be customized and what the key sort of steps are involved. But yeah, that was really great. I think we're going to have a couple questions still come in for you, and I'm going to hold on to them for the end because I want to make sure we get to Gillian too. So thank you so much, everyone. If you're thinking about a question for Anne about how credit counseling works, or anything else to do with debt management or income levels or what have you, please let us know, and we'll collect them for the end. And I'm going to carry on with our second speaker, Gillian Goldblatt from Spergel. Gillian, you'll be pleased to know, I'm sure, that we have at least one other licensed insolvency trustee listening in, which we found out earlier from our question about the kind of services our listeners provide. So you've got some common colleagues in the audience with you. But I'm going to turn the presentation over to you, and we're looking forward to hearing you tell us all about consumer proposals and debt management.
Thanks very much, Glenna, and thanks to everyone who's joined us today. Hopefully you'll find some useful information from my presentation. Just quickly, a little bit about myself. I'm a licensed insolvency trustee, licensed by the Superintendent of Bankruptcy, which is a national organization that oversees all trustees in Canada. I've been with MSI Spergel for 10 years now, and I've been in the financial services industry for 16 years. Glenna, if you wouldn't mind going on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just a bit of an overview of our industry and our profession and what we do. As I already mentioned, we're licensed and regulated federally by a government agency. We've all passed numerous courses and taken various exams to earn our registration. We generally come, and I come from an accounting background, so I'm a CA or CPA by trade. All of our debt solutions that we offer our clients are legally binding on all their creditors, on the unsecured creditors. We're technically officers of the court, so we don't work for either the debtor or the creditor. We help our clients go through their financial information and help them make an assessment of what their best debt solution option is. And our role is to really gather and organize and verify that information. And help them work with the creditors to find a solution. Our fees, as far as what we charge, are set out by the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, which is a national piece of legislation, and they're based on tariffs. So when it comes to licensed insolvency trustee fees, they are the same across the board, all across Canada. So there's no differentiation there for us. Glenna, if you could go on, thank you. The first question I usually get is, when should I tell a client to come and see you? And my answer is really, if they can't pay their bills, we should probably be having a conversation. Anne already mentioned, and I think it's an excellent point, and our firm's philosophy is very much the same. We're here to talk to people who are in financial crisis, who really don't have a lifeline, and we're just here to chat. And I'll go on into some details later, but similar to Anne's organization, we have a helpline that's staffed by a real person who is quite knowledgeable and accredited until 9 p.m. every weekday. We offer appointments on evenings and weekends because we understand people in these kind of situations generally have difficulty getting time off work to come see someone to deal with their issues. So, and those conversations and those initial meetings are all free. There's no cost associated with any of them. We very much see our place in the Canadian financial landscape as being here to promote financial literacy and to assist those that are struggling and make sure that they have access to what we call the insolvency system. And by insolvency system, I mean any debt solution that would be available to any Canadian, whether it's through a trustee, through a credit counselor, through any other type of agency. But I think for us as a firm, access is a very important point, because probably for many of the clients that those on the webinar are working with, there are some myths out there as to how much it costs and what's going to happen to my credit score, and it can prevent them accessing what might really be a fresh start for them if they were to utilize the system. Really quickly, we have 29 offices across Canada. The majority are here in Ontario, and we're all across southwestern Ontario. But we're also in BC, in Burnaby, and we're in Saskatchewan, in both Regina and Saskatoon. And we have partner independent firms in both Alberta, Manitoba, and on all the East Coast provinces who we partner with. So if you have a client in those areas, we have firms similar to us that we can refer you to, that we can attest as to the quality and standards that they operate with. So I think that that's a pretty good overview. Glenna, if you wouldn't mind moving on to the next slide. So I'm going to start with so we offer pretty much two solutions for individuals. I'm going to start with the first one, which is called a consumer proposal. A consumer proposal is essentially an offer to an individual's creditors to assist them in repaying what they owe, but it's at a reduced amount. So sort of a little bit in contrast to what Anne's solutions involve, ours would be a reduction of the principal debt owing. It can range anywhere between 20% and 80%. It really depends on the individual's budget, their income, their expenses. So that's something that we work through with the individual. Our firm's been in operation for 30 years now. We have extensive experience in working with all creditors, and so we have a very good sense of what would need to be offered in order for a consumer proposal to go through, and I'll get to that in a bit. Another important point I want to make here is that our debt solutions, because it's a legal proceeding in Canada, encompass all unsecured debt. So it's not just credit cards. It would include things such as student loans, tax debts, and things of that nature. Often those are things that can be quite significant and really need to be included in order for a person to get a fresh start. So what we do is we work with the individual. We come up with a payment plan that would fit into their budget. We come up with a monthly amount that obviously gives them a bit of breathing room and freedom to budget more correctly and be able to, you can even start to save while you're in a consumer proposal. There's nothing that prevents you from doing that. The consumer proposal is an offer to your creditors on a minimum monthly amount. It cannot stretch beyond 5 years, and we generally file them for 5 years. And if you happen to get a raise or hopefully get a job if you're out of work and your monthly income goes up, one of the biggest benefits of a consumer proposal is that your monthly payment does not change. Your creditors enter that agreement with you on the date of the proposal, and that holds until it's completed. So you don't have to be concerned with, if your income fluctuates. That payment is your minimum payment and it won't change. You can, however, pay more if you do get a raise or get a new job or something changes, some circumstance in your life changes. And there's absolutely no penalty for that. And all it means is that you would simply complete your proposal earlier. And so that's a wonderful opportunity for a lot of individuals to get on with their life at a sooner rate if they can. I highlighted a little bit earlier, and I'll go into detail. So the trustee helps our clients formulate the proposal, and then we communicate with all of your creditors all at once, tabling the proposal. We explain why we think it's in their best interest. That is generally because we have gone through with you to help them understand that you are offering more than the creditors would get if you were to file a bankruptcy. And so that should entice them to accept the proposal. Sometimes the creditors come back and ask for a little bit more, and we work with our clients to decide whether that counteroffer is something that they can afford or not. It is completely up to our clients as to whether they want to proceed with offering a bit more. We leave it in their hands, but it is an option at times. But we generally try to formulate what we think the best offer will be for the creditors. One of the other huge benefits of a proposal is that we don't need to negotiate with each creditor individually. We send the offer out to all creditors. They vote based on the value of their claim in the proposal, and we only need 50% of the voting creditors in value to pass that proposal. So, it is a bit of a cram down in the sense that if you have one large creditor and that creditor votes yes, all of your other creditors are bound by your proposal plan. So that can be a huge benefit to most as well. I think I've talked about the next couple of points. One of the other huge benefits of the solutions that we offer, again, because it's a legal proceeding, is as soon as you file a proposal or a bankruptcy, it immediately freezes there's a stay of proceedings over your creditors. They should not be contacting you, and we can assist you in stopping that from happening. But they cannot pursue you anymore, whether there was a statement of claim issued or any judgment that you were dealing with. That is all immediately stayed, barring a few small exceptions, but I won't go into the weeds on that one. And it freezes all interest and penalties immediately. And so you really do have, and I love the way that Anne described it earlier, is you're in a bit of a protected zone at that point. You've stopped the clock, and you can really sort of sit back and deal with your situation. And maybe there are some other factors in your life that you really haven't been able to turn your mind to because your finances have been so overwhelming. So by stopping the clock and putting yourself in this protected zone, you can sort of pivot and deal with those at that point. So I've talked about you paying it off earlier, and our fees. So our fees, as far as what we charge, they come out of those monthly payments. So the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act simply sets out a scheme. There's a certain amount up front, and then we simply get a percentage, sort of similar to Anne, as to whatever your proposal or your bankruptcy is going to your creditors. The trustees' fees come out of that. So when we formulate a proposal with you and build that payment into your budget, our fees are irrelevant at that point, because they'll simply fall out of whatever you can afford to offer. There's nothing, absolutely nothing in addition to that monthly payment that you're setting up. So Glenn, if we could go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the only other solution really that we offer that's a formal proceeding is called a bankruptcy. I'm sure many of you out there have heard this term before. We call it the big scary B word. Before I go on to what technically a bankruptcy involves, I think the point I want to highlight most for those on the line is that I think there's a bit of a stigma or a bit of fear in coming to see a licensed insolvency trustee, because it is a formal proceeding. But what I really want to encourage you to think about is that often in my practice, my biggest frustration is that people come to see us too late. And so had they come to see us maybe a year earlier, maybe we could have put together a really good proposal for them and they could have gone on with their life. Something about a proposal, sorry, that I neglected to mention is that you don't have to give up any of your assets. You keep everything. We're simply taking any equity in them into account when we're formulating the proposal, but it doesn't require surrendering anything. And so because of that, a proposal is a really great option as opposed to a bankruptcy, because you stay in control of your life. And by sometimes burying your head in the sand or the fear of speaking to somebody, they'll try other options, trying to manage it themselves, or pay down more interest. And all they've done is really throw away quite a bit of money that they can't afford to throw away. And by the time they come to see us, unfortunately, their options are a little bit more limited. So I'd really just like to highlight, a phone call is free. It costs you nothing. And to pick up the phone and call us, and as Anne said, it goes both ways. If you call us and we say, you don't really need our services, like you can go see a credit counselor, you really only have let's say one credit card, or you're making a fairly good income and you just need some budgeting techniques, we'll refer you over to an agency like Anne's or some other ones in other provinces. But having that conversation with a professional early on is worth its weight in gold, as far as it's free, there's no time commitment, and it could save you a lot of money in the long run, as opposed to going down the garden path in some instances, trying to manage it yourself. So I think I just really like to get out there. We're here to talk, and if you go to our Trustpilot and our Google reviews, I think we actually have a few of our clients that have specifically ended up not using our services. They simply called in and chatted, and their comments were, we just pointed them in the right direction, and so they weren't spinning their wheels and they knew exactly where to go, and we're here as that resource as well. So I'm just going to quickly wrap up on bankruptcy. Bankruptcy we really see as the last resort, but unfortunately for some people it really is necessary and can be a life-changing event. If your wages are being garnished, you're usually in a very tough spot and you need immediate relief because you're not able to cover your bills as a result of that. Both a bankruptcy and a consumer proposal can immediately stop that wage garnishment, again, because we're filing a legal proceeding. And so that's a huge benefit that a lot of people take advantage of. As I sort of touched on before, in a bankruptcy, we do have to look at your assets and assess what equity you might have in some of them that might be available for your creditors. There are exempt assets. So, you can keep your household goods, your clothing, tools of the trade up to a certain amount, a car up to a certain value. If you have a little bit of equity in your house, you can keep that. Sorry, that's a typo on the slide, Glenna, and I apologize to everyone. That should say RRSP, not RESP.
Okay,
and
thanks,
I
Gillian.
apologize for not catching that. Don't know how I missed it.
We'll correct that before we send them out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and so your RRSP is also an exempt asset, excluding any contributions you'd made in the last year. So it's only those, you'd have to pay back to your creditors. So we would work through you as to how much is owing, and then you'd have to work through a payment plan as far as aggregating all this equity and paying it back to your creditors over a certain time frame. The other component of a bankruptcy that it would be payable to your creditors is what's called surplus income. I often say I quite dislike that it's called surplus income, because it makes it sound like people are swimming in all this excess cash. As we all know, the people you're working with, that's very much not the case, but unfortunately that is the legal term that it goes by. What it simply refers to is that the superintendent of bankruptcy has set out a set of standards where if you make above a certain amount, and this is true nationally, so across the country, you have to pay back 50% of that amount to your creditors. That's over that sort of what I call it's really a basic living standard, and it varies by the number of people in your household, which is why I haven't given everyone the exact statistics, because it's a very long graph, and you can look it up. You can look it up online, or I'm happy to share it with individuals after this webinar. Bankrupts are required based on some calculations, and there are also some expenses that can be deducted from them if they're prescribed, but you have to pay that back to your creditors. The length of a bankruptcy, it generally depends on whether you owe this quote unquote, and I'm using air quotes now, as Ann did, surplus income. If you're a first-time bankrupt and you have no surplus owing, you'd be in bankruptcy for 9 months and generally be discharged automatically unless you had some factor where it would not be allowed to do that, and I won't go into the weeds on that one. If you're a first-time bankrupt and you have surplus income owing, you would be in bankruptcy for 21 months, and it goes on there for a second-time bankrupt. No surplus is 24 months, and a second-time bankrupt with surplus is 26 months. I've provided, as part of this webinar, a handout that I'm pretty sure is accessible to everyone who's on the line, and I've put some of the weeds on this in that handout, some of the finer details, so you can take that away with you, which should be helpful because it's a lot to digest, I think, all at once. But those are pretty much the main points that I wanted to cover. I just quickly wanted to touch on, and I sort of referenced this earlier in my presentation, some of the myths that are out there that can sometimes be a hindrance to people coming in to see us. So I wanted to just sort of throw those out there and hopefully dispel them. So I've heard before people say, well, I didn't think I could afford a bankruptcy. So, the standard cost for a bankruptcy, if you have no surplus, so the trustee couldn't take our fees out of the payments to creditors, as I sort of alluded to, is generally how we get paid. But if you have absolutely nothing that you can offer your creditors, is often the case with low-income individuals, the standard fee is $1,800, which would be $200 over 9 months. But as I know, and I'm sure many of you can appreciate, even that payment is just not affordable, for someone on OW or ODSP. And so our firm has committed to being part of what's called the Bankruptcy Assistance Program here in Ontario, and that allows low-income individuals to access bankruptcy or the insolvency system for a reduced rate, and that's something that we absolutely subscribe to and can assist individuals. I have some bankrupts with me right now. They're retired individuals, retired seniors on fixed pensions or on government pensions, and they're paying me $50 or $75 a month, and I've extended the length of their bankruptcy a little bit just to allow them to get there, but they really did need to access the system, and we will help them do that. I've also heard the myth that, what if my proposal fails? Am I automatically bankrupt? And the answer is absolutely not. If your proposal fails, which means your creditors simply don't accept it, you are not bankrupt. You're simply back to where you started before you filed the proposal, and you're unable to file another proposal within the next 6 months. But other than that, there's really no penalty. A lot of concern, and this is maybe a little bit Ontario-centric, but we have a lot of clients that don't speak English. English is not their first language. So we're lucky here. We live in this multicultural nation, and we've got staff that speak everything from Tamil, Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, Russian. I've got, I could list a whole bunch of languages, but if your clients need to speak to someone in a certain language, generally speaking, we can generally assist in getting someone who can speak their language. And generally that makes them more comfortable as well. The last myth is that the consultation will cost too much. As I've already alluded to, you can pick up the phone and call us anytime. It's absolutely free. You don't have to give any identifying information. I don't even think we ask for your name. We're just happy to chat. And so if that fear you see is really there, we're also happy if you'd like to call us with your client, if they're meeting with you and they want, some moral support. We're happy to speak with both them and yourself if that would facilitate the process. So here's my personal contact information, and you've got my email and phone number. And then on the handout that I've provided to everyone for today, I've got our firm's toll-free number and our sort of general email address that you can email and call at any time in the top right-hand corner, or feel free to reach out to me directly at any time. Our website there at the bottom, if you go on there, there's lots of great information, and you can set up a chat time with our consultants at any time, and you can book that automatically in the calendar. You don't even have to speak to someone to set up an appointment. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible and remove all those barriers. So I think that's generally it for me, and happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Gillian. That was, like you said, that was just a wealth of information, and it's clear that you give this information quite frequently and quite easily. So thank you for explaining all of it so clearly and in such detail as well. So I know we have a lot of questions, and I'm going to do my best to get as many of them to you as possible. Those of you who are keen to hear some questions answered, we might try to go to 1 or 2 minutes after the hour. If we can get a couple more questions answered, I think that would be worth it. But we understand that your time is valuable, and so if you need to dash, we thank you for having been with us for the first 55 minutes of this hour. Anne and Gillian, we've got questions ready to go, so I'm going to start right ahead. And we had some questions about debt management plans and credit reports. Can you tell us, does a debt management plan show up on a credit report in the same way that a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy would?
It shows up very similar. Thank you for the question, actually. Excuse me. It shows up similarly to a consumer proposal. So as an R7, because it's a voluntary process, not a legal process, there's no legal filing date. So it will show up as an R7. There could be, it really is at the discretion of the creditors to put in a clause to say undergoing credit counseling. But in those cases, and when it becomes a situation where there's perhaps a landlord looking at a credit report or something like that, or if somebody's applying for a car loan while they're still in the period of the debt management program, the counselors often can write letters of recommendation, or they'll write a support letter to explain what that is and why it's there.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's really helpful. And can you answer one more on debt management plans? Can you clarify, is it zero interest on all debts with a debt management plan? Like, are all debts included in that?
Unfortunately, no. It's with the typical, it's reduced interest. Yeah, and in a lot of cases, and certainly with the major financial institutions, for things like credit cards, it comes down to zero. It just depends on, every case is different, but typically the larger ones, the larger financial institutions, it comes to zero. But with something like a payday loan, it won't come right to zero, but it certainly gets reduced. We have different agreements with different creditors, but it would come down, let's say, from 30 to 5 or something like that. Depends.
Okay, great. Gillian, I have a couple of consumer proposal questions for you next. Can you tell us again, and I can't remember if you went into all this detail already in your presentation, but can you tell us what the exceptions are in a consumer proposal?
Oh, hi there. Sorry, I think I was on mute.
That's okay.
Yeah, so some of the exceptions to a consumer proposal and a bankruptcy, really, there are certain debts. So student loans, in the sense that if you have ceased to be, in order to discharge a student loan, you have to have not ceased being a student for 7 years. So and that's generally the rule. There's a bit of a maybe around 5 years, but for general purposes, 7 years after you've ceased being a student, you can completely discharge your student loan. If you've been a student within that time, then the student loan can be included in the consumer proposal or the bankruptcy. It's just simply that any balance that isn't received by the creditor as part of those payments, would still be owing beyond that.
Okay, great. And similar to what was asked of Anne.
Sorry, Glenna. My apologies, Glenna. I just wanted to add one more very important type of payment. So support payments. So child support payments, spousal support payments. Those are not discharged by either a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy, as well as court fines, because those are a legal fine. So just thought I'd add those in.
Yeah, no, those are really important. Thank you. We had another consumer proposal question similar to what Anne was asked about the DMP. What's the credit impact for a consumer proposal in the long term? Like, is it similar to bankruptcy where it stays in your credit report for quite a while?
Yeah, so if you and I've included this in the handout, so you guys should have a reference, but it goes to an R7, so it's on your credit report for the entire length of the proposal, which I mentioned was up to the 5 years. If you pay it off sooner, obviously you complete it sooner. It then stays on as an R7 rating for 3 additional years. There's slight variation between the different agencies, but let's just go with 3 as a general number, beyond when you complete the proposal. But we work with our clients, and I'm sure Anne does as well, where you can really start to rebuild your credit while you're still in a consumer proposal. You just have to know where to go, and things like secured credit cards that can assist you in starting to rebuild, even though you've still got that showing up on the report itself.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's very similar with the debt management program, just to butt in.
Yeah, no, thank you. Definitely. And while you're butting in, we had another question again to clarify student loans, in terms of the credit counseling process. Are student loans, can those be dealt with during the credit counseling process as well?
They can't be included in a debt management program per se, but certainly they're considered. So when we talk about, if a debt management program works, if it's applicable, that all gets taken in. I mean, we look at the full budget and the full sense of obligation, or all the obligations. So the numbers all have to work. So but it doesn't get included for interest rate reduction and things like that. So again, if it won't work and fit nicely into the debt management program, then we'll certainly make referrals to, we'll get people connected with a trustee to perhaps it might be more applicable or better for a consumer proposal.
Okay, great. And then really quickly, we have a couple of very specific questions, but I know we're not going to be able to get to all of them. So Anne or Gillian, if you're able to answer them offline, I might see if that's an option, because I know these are really important. But on one final question, I wonder if both of you, since I know many folks on the line are working with clients on limited income or who are on social assistance, could you just maybe give one kind of final sum up of if there's anything different that would be the case for accessing your services for someone who is living on that type of income? Is there anything different as far as the type of debts they can access, or the rates, or anything like that? Anne, why don't you go first?
Okay, and I apologize. There's some construction noise that's just appeared, of course, at the worst possible time. No, anyone is able to call us and get some information. And, there are, as Gillian mentioned, our wish always is that people call earlier. The earlier anyone calls, the more options there are. But we definitely will meet with someone, speak to them, and then figure out where the best place we can work with them is. Okay,
great. And Gillian, for you?
Yeah, I would just say there's no difference. I think I've already sort of mentioned is we would just work with them so that we do try and reduce our fees so that they can access the system and get the relief they're looking for. But it wouldn't change as to the type of debts we can compromise.
Okay, great. Thank you both so much. I really appreciate hearing from you today, and for everyone who's been listening in. We've had about 95 of you listening in with us today over the last hour, and we really appreciate that. We know your time is very valuable, and we thank you for spending it with us. We want to just remind you that we will send you the resources from today. We'll send you the slides, the recording, and we'll be posting these on our Learning Hub as well in the webinars page, and we'll also make sure that you receive the handouts. Within these slides is also the contact information for our presenters, Anne and Gillian, and I know they'll be very happy to be in touch with you if you have more questions that you want to follow up with. So thank you again, and as one parting promotion, we want to share with you at Prosper Canada, we have a new resource in this area. This is a set of 7 worksheets on the topic of dealing with debt, and these are worksheets designed to help you work with a client through the key steps involved in managing debt. And we have a number of informational resources in the final pages that are very much relevant to the kind of material that Anne and Gillian were talking about today. So you can access that on our Learning Hub as well. But if you'd like to order hard copies from us, we can do that for you. Here's all our contact information. Again, you'll hear from us very shortly with the materials from today as well as a survey. So we hope you'll tell us how you liked today's presentation and tell us more about what you'd like to hear from next. We are continuing to build our webinar series for 2019, and we look forward to bringing many more great topics to you. So thank you again to Anne and Gillian, and thank you all of you for listening in today. We hope you have a great afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you next time.